So I'm going to talk about 3 qualities that effective leaders need to have in order to be successful. And the first quality that I'm going to talk about is every effective leader has to have a vision. And I'm going to give some examples of leaders in the past who've had a vision and have been very successful because of their very clear, unwavering vision. The first example is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln has been quoted as one of the top 3 presidents of the United States. And Abraham Lincoln had an unwavering vision to have the country united, to not have the North and the South fighting against each other, a nation divided amongst itself. And he made sure that he did whatever it took to get the country to be united. Abraham Lincoln also, a little side note, was a pretty humble person. He didn't have a massive ego. And there have been leaders in history who have had big egos, who have caused some problems in the world, or who were successful initially, but their egos got the better of them. Abraham Lincoln always remained humble and surrounded himself by people better than himself in some areas, and wasn't threatened by others who knew more or were more intelligent. He actually used their strengths to help the country be better off. Another example of a leader with vision has been Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of England. Margaret Thatcher came into the Prime Minister's office in 1980, where the country was in a terrible state. The country had been gripped by the unions, and the economy was at its worst in a long time. This was very difficult for British people to deal with because the British Empire was one of the greatest empires, and the sun never set on the British Empire in Queen Victoria's reign. And now, when Margaret Thatcher came into office, the country was in economic ruin. So Margaret Thatcher's vision was to get the country into a very stable economic situation, and she did this in a very unwavering, very direct fashion, and the unions eventually crumbled, and the country was in a very good financial shape by the end of the 1980s. So she had this vision which she would not let go of, and they used to say about Margaret Thatcher that she was so courageous and gutsy, she was the only man in the cabinet. The third leader I'm going to talk about is from my home country, in case you're wondering about my accent, is South Africa. Nelson Mandela is the example of a leader with vision who took the country from also a situation where there could have been civil war between the white government and the majority black population, and he was thrown into jail because he protested apartheid and spent 27 years in jail. And his quest was to create a free, truly free democratic South Africa where everybody could vote. And the government in power tried to barter with him and negotiate certain conditions, and then they would let him out of jail. And he said, no, absolutely not. Not until this country is truly free and there are free democratic elections will I ever set foot out of jail. And eventually it happened. And in 1980 he was released. And in 1994 he became the first ever truly democratic president or leader of South Africa. The second quality that effective leaders have is they are generally positive people with good energy. In today's world, this has become more important because nobody who's got negative energy is going to be elected into a position of public office. Most people want their leaders to be chipper, happy type people. An example of this where things really changed was in 1960 with the presidential debates between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. Nixon was ahead in the polls at the time, and Kennedy was this young upstart from Massachusetts, and some people thought he'd never make it. Well, that day, during that first ever televised debates, Nixon showed up, and he was sweating, and he wasn't feeling well, and he seemed a bit crotchety, a bit negative. And Kennedy was bright and happy and had a good presence and seemed positive. Well, after that debate in the court of public opinion, Kennedy surged ahead in the polls and eventually won that election. And I think things have never been the same since then. The third quality that effective leaders have is emotional intelligence. Another way to put it is a level of maturity. And studies have shown that people with a high IQ don't necessarily go nearly as far in life as people with a high EQ, emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. And one of the main components of this is a level of self-awareness. Effective leaders are able to reflect on themselves and to look at themselves objectively and see how they're doing, and able to separate what's working and what's not working. They don't operate in a state of denial and bury their heads in the sand like an ostrich. So again, the three main qualities that effective leaders have are vision, positive energy, and a level of emotional intelligence.